All right, I think we're good. All right, everybody ready? You ready, Lori?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Hi, this is Charlie Zeiss from Stargate Pyramids. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're doing a special presentation that involves looking at the science behind the Russian pyramid research as it relates to health, and specifically regarding the highly concern of the coronavirus and its potential to cause havoc around the world. And so we're all concerned about that. And this seemed like a timely occasion to talk about this. So joining me today is Bill McKenzie, Lori Sasson, and Lisa Richards. We thank you all for listening today. And I hope that you find this information that we're going to talk about today valuable and helpful. We will be getting back in next week and coming weeks to some of the topics that we've been discussing previously. I don't know if we're going to finish talking about the health benefits of the pyramids today, but if we don't finish it today, we're certainly going to at least talk about the coronavirus and immune function, and we can save some of this for another time. But before we get started, just one piece of information that I wanted to supply. I got a call from Craig Morin over the weekend. For those of you who know him, Craig is the owner of precisionpyramids.com. He is a manufacturer of wooden pyramids. And I mentioned a couple of sessions ago that he was in the process of putting together blueprints for the Russian geometry pyramids for those of you who wanted to make perhaps larger ones or make them out of wood. So Craig called me. He's got that finished. He's actually sending me a copy of the new blueprints that I hope to have in the next few days. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be interviewing Craig here on the live stream so he can tell you all about that. So I think that's going to be exciting for those of you who want to make larger ones and need blueprints to assist you with that process. So anyway, without further ado, I think I'm going to open up our screen share here, and we'll start the discussion on the coronavirus and Russian pyramid research. So to start with today, I wanted to give this some context. I got this information from this morning's New York Times, and essentially, at this point, the coronavirus outbreak has sickened more than 79,000 people in Asia, according to statements from health officials. Many other cases are suspected but not confirmed. And as of Monday, that's today, at least 2,623 people have died. All but 30 of those are in mainland China. Now, the rest of the information here, I just want to give people some context because we're all concerned about this and the potential for it becoming a worldwide pandemic. And I think we all should be legitimately concerned, and that's the reason why we're doing this show today. But I do want to put this in context of deaths on a worldwide basis. So I threw in some other information about the number of deaths that occur each day around the world, and that's actually almost 152,000 deaths per day. So to put this in context, the cumulative death total, at least as reported, and I can understand that it may be underreported by some significant amount, but still is going to be in the range of even if you double that number, it would only equate to about the number of people who would normally die around the world in 1 hour. So I'm not making light of it, but I also want to put this in context so that people can understand and appreciate, this in a greater context. So let's go over some of the symptoms of the coronavirus. According to the World Health Organization, Signs of infection include fever, cough, shortness of breath, and breathing difficulties. In more severe cases, it can lead to pneumonia, multiple organ failure, and even death. And now I want to talk about who's most at risk. And we're going to see that this dovetails very, very clearly into the Russian pyramid research on immune function. So these are two articles that I found one Friday and I believe last Saturday on Zero Hedge. The one on Friday said that patients who are especially vulnerable to the virus include the very old, the very young, and those with co-occurring conditions such as other forms of disease or illness. And then another article on Saturday said that perhaps 80% of the people seem to get a fairly light form of this illness. So, to keep that in context as we go forward, the vast majority of people do not get severely ill from this virus. But groups that seem particularly prone, again, include the elderly, people who smoke, those who are obese, those with high blood pressure, diabetes, or poor immune systems. And males, for some reason, do seem to have worse outcomes than females. Two more studies, one here from The Guardian. This one says that in the second paragraph, at the moment, it appears that people who are at greater risk are the elderly and probably the very young. We're going to be talking about the very young and the fact that their immune system, just as the elderly, are compromised. And that's why they are most susceptible to a viral infection such as the coronavirus. And finally, some information from bbc.com. And again, this is referring to a study that just came out late last week on the first details of more than 44,000 cases of the virus. Data from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention finds that more than 80% of the cases have been mild, with the sick and the elderly most at risk. So that's a little bit of background before we start into the Russian pyramid research. So the Russians have been studying the health effects of these pyramids for about 30 years now, and they have come up with some very profound results. And that's what we want to discuss today, because the areas, particularly with respect to immune function, are particularly important and relevant to a discussion of public health situations such as the coronavirus. So to start with, here's a picture of one of the Russian pyramids near Moscow, and a picture of Dr. Alexander Golod, who was the head of the research team that studied these pyramids. But this is a quote from Joseph Marcello, who wrote the book, The Healing Power of Pyramids, which is probably the single best source of information on the Russian pyramid research that you can find. But he said that the contemporary pyramid research owes an incalculable debt of gratitude to Dr. Golod, who single-handedly brought about a renaissance in pyramid science through his construction of over 50 geographically strategic pyramids throughout Russia and the Ukraine, where teams of physicians and clinicians extensively documented their stunning powers in a variety of venues. And now the next is a quote from Pyramids RU from Dr. Golod. And I think it's a good way to start our discussion. The field structure of any object, be it a mineral, a solution, cellular tissue, or a living creature, undergoes major changes in the area of impact of the pyramid. These structures become ordered, optimal, and harmonious. In this zone, ordinary thought forms, simple wishes become part of the field structure, which increases the probability of events initiated in the pyramid field by this thought by many orders of magnitude. The power and strength of field structures ordered in this way increases dramatically as all components are in resonance with the shape of the pyramids, which is the state of harmony. And then a quote as well to be cognizant of as we think about the coronavirus from a public health perspective. The conductive studies give every reason to believe that it is actually easier to get rid of severe pathologies of a city, country, or planet than it is to get rid of it for one patient. And I think this is a real way to reduce the burden of healthcare. So what Gawlat is saying here in summary is that the public health information that we're going to be talking about today points to a dramatic decrease in cancer, carcinogenic tumors, in communicable diseases and the like due to the exposure of the public to the pyramid. So now I want to start to talk about some of this specific information, which is just so powerful that has come about from the Russian pyramid research. And the first one that we're going to talk about, the Russian geometry pyramids produce a 10-fold increase in the survival rate of mice exposed to the salmonella typhimirium virus. Now, that's a virus that produces the effect of typhoid fever in mice. So the methodology, the mice were kept in a pyramid in various numbers and for various periods of time. After several days, the mice were infected with increasing doses of the salmonella typhimirium virus. The control group was supplied with mice from the same strain and was contaminated with the same doses of culture, but without exposure to the pyramid fields. So we've got a classic controlled experiment here. Some mice exposed to the pyramid and some not. So the results, the survival rate of mice who received exposure to the pyramid field greatly exceeded those in the control group. At smaller doses of contamination, 60% of the mice exposed to the pyramid survived versus 7% in the control group. Again, almost 10 times the survival rate. And at larger doses of contamination, 30% of the mice exposed to the pyramid field survived versus just 3% in the control group. So the conclusion that can be drawn here is that exposure of mice to the pyramid field promotes the heightening of their resistance to consequent contamination of Salmonella typhimirium. Therefore, it is possible to speak about a powerful immuno-enhancing influence of the pyramid, as mice exposed to the pyramid prior to contamination had survival rates that were 10 times higher than that of the control group. So I'll stop here and see if anybody has any comments to date. Okay, we'll move on. In another study, it was determined that the pyramid provides a dramatic antiviral and anti-cancer effect. And remember, once again, we're talking about a virus here with the coronavirus. And just to make a distinction for those of you like me who, until I started doing this, I'd forgotten a lot of my immune function knowledge, but a virus is a organism that cannot survive on its own and needs to invade the cell of the human cell in order to multiply and survive, as opposed to a bacteria, which can survive on its own, but which can still cause illness and damage to the human body. But both can have dramatic impacts depending on the type of virus or bacteria involved. So anyway, the activity of the drug venoglobulin was determined by its capacity to protect mice from the cytopathic or cell-destroying impact of the encephalomyocarditis or EMC virus. Now, before we go on, for those of you who don't know what venoglobulin is, I want to talk about that for a minute. They call it a drug, and that may just be a translation issue with Google Translate from Russian. But I want to tell you what, globulins are, and so that you can understand that these are actually naturally occurring substances from the body. So if you look down on the second half of this page, uh, they still call it a medication, but not a drug here, is used to strengthen the body's natural defense system to lower the risk of infection in persons with a weakened immune system. This medication is made from healthy human blood that has a high level of defensive substances or antibodies, which help to fight infections. Now, the reason why I want to point that out, you'll see here in a moment, but this is really not a drug. It's a naturally occurring substance in the body, which is full of naturally occurring antibodies. So with that said, we'll go back to the methodology. Venoglobulin was diluted in distilled water up to concentrations of 50 milligrams or micrograms, pardon me, per liter. The drug was tested in two concentrations, 50 and 0.5 micrograms per liter. And then a portion of the solutions were housed in the pyramid. Venoglobulin was deposited into cell-like cultures 24 hours prior to their contamination with the virus. So again, to review what we've got two cultures here. One is made with pyramid water and one is made just with distilled water. They make these up, and now we're going to start to put in the venoglobulin. So in the results, it was found that venoglobulin in the higher concentration of 50 micrograms per milliliter lowered the breeding capacity of the EMC virus by about 300%, which is a very substantial impact. However, when the concentration was reduced to 0.5 micrograms per milliliter, this effect was no longer observed. That's a key thing to remember. However, when we look at the venoglobulin that was housed in the pyramid, the 0.5 microgram per milliliter solution that was housed in the pyramid was actually 150% more effective than the 50 microgram per milliliter concentration of venoglobulin that was not housed in the pyramid. And an enhanced antiviral effect of the venoglobulin housed in the pyramid was maintained even at further dilutions up to 0.005 and 0.0005 micrograms per milliliter, pointing to the importance of the direct exposure of the solution to the pyramid as the cause for the decreased breeding capacity of the virus. So what we're finding here is that when you take the naturally occurring antibodies that you get from venoglobulin and you put them in at a fairly substantial dosage rate, it does have an impact, but an even more significant impact can be achieved by putting that concentration even in much reduced dilutions inside the pyramid. So that points to the dramatic impact that the pyramid water or pyramid exposure is having to the enhancement of the immune function. And to continue on, the venoglobulin, which does not have a protective effect on the cells at 0.5 micrograms per milliliter, after being in the pyramid, had a virus inhibiting effect more pronounced than the drug 100 times more concentrated. And finally, a similar picture was observed when mice were injected with various carcinogens. Now, a carcinogen is not necessarily a virus. In fact, it usually isn't. So it can be things like smoke and chemicals and other environmental toxins. So mice in the experimental group drank water exposed in the pyramid. The control group drank ordinary water. And the result was the probability of tumors developing in the control group was several times higher than that for animals that drank water exposed in the pyramid. So we've got several examples here of enhanced immune function in mice that demonstrably prove that exposure to the pyramid has had a dramatic impact on the immune function of the subjects that were exposed to the pyramid.
You know, the questions that I think of are where was the water put in the pyramid? As so many times we've shown that depending on, you know, whether it was on the ground, in the middle, or closer to the top, it had a significant different effect with the energy, but it doesn't really say here where they place the water.
Well, and Laura, that's an excellent question. A lot of the information that we have available to us are essentially abstracts. The actual research was never allowed to be published in the West, and probably now is being kept under wraps in Russia. So it's hard to know, and that's one of the big reasons why I'm setting up this foundation along with Lisa and Marta Thomas to try to look at these issues. So more research to come is all I can say in terms of where to put it. But we do know from these synopses that there's a huge immune enhancing power from the pyramids. So anyway, the next one that we're going to talk about actually impacts the immune system of humans. And it's not normal that you're going to find experiments of this nature being done on humans, but when you understand the context of this experiment, you'll see why I guess the Russians felt it was appropriate to try to do this. They were studying immune system compromised premature babies who would be measured in the second paragraph with something called the instantaneous state index. Now, quite honestly, I looked for that. I don't know if it's lost in translation, but I couldn't get an exact definition of what that was, except that it does reflect a patient's sympatho-adrenal system and how well it's functioning. And that's a big part of the immune function system. So essentially, they administered this to 20 premature babies with compromised immune systems who would have normally died in any event within a few days because their immune systems were so incredibly compromised. But what happened was, in the conclusion, data on 20 patients was analyzed in all cases, even in patients with very low indices close to zero, after the administration of this solution that had been stored inside of the pyramid, the instantaneous state index rose substantially to practically normal levels. And the same thing occurred after the application of 1 milliliter of water only as exposure to the pyramid. So it had nothing to do with the glucose. So once again, we're finding that the pyramid water has had a dramatic impact. And as they say, most of these babies would have normally been expected to die. Every single one of them survived. So this is just an amazing result, proving that this impact occurs in humans as well. Just to talk about infections briefly in premature babies, the second paragraph here, regardless of when an infection is acquired, infections in premature infants are more difficult to treat for two reasons, the most important of which is the very first statement. A premature baby has a less developed immune system and fewer antibodies from the mother than a full-term baby. And the immune system and antibodies are the body's main defenses against infection. So basically what it's saying is when a severely premature baby is born, its immune function, as is true with even a normal term baby, is nowhere near fully developed at birth. And that's one of the reasons why children are prone to infections, much more so than grown-ups, because the immune function is not fully formed. So with a premature baby, it's just going to be a problem that's even more important and exacerbates the potential for death from serious infection. And now we're going to finally talk about the reductions that were found in airborne environmental poisonings. These could be various carcinogens, as we'll find in the data from cancer and infectious diseases. So the main part of this study deals with a gas condensate plant in Astrakhan, Russia. And this plant has been poisoning the environment for years and years, and is actually still working to my knowledge. But as of the time of the writing of this study, due to the extent of the pollution, all of the villagers around this particular plant within a 30-kilometer zone had to be resettled. And I've looked at pictures from Google Maps of this area around this plant in Astrakhan, and there is nothing around it. So this must just be a horribly noxious plant. And it says that the city of Naramanov is 40 kilometers away, or 25 miles, but it's downwind, and it was still experiencing environmental pollution, which was causing a tremendous amount of public health disease in the city. So essentially what happened was the general director of this plant got into discussions with Dr. Golod. It was determined that they would build a 22-meter Russian pyramid midway between the plant and the city of Naramanov. And now the results. Data collected by the city health department indicate that prior to the installation of the pyramid, there was an average of 550 to 650 cases of environmental poisonings per year. In the first year after the pyramid was constructed, the number of reported poisoning cases dropped by more than 50% to 208. A year later, only 70 poisonings were reported. And the following year, there were only a few isolated poisoning cases, at which point the city health department stopped keeping the statistics due to the dramatic decline in the reported poisonings. And in similar experiments, circular contours of granite and quartz that had been stored under one of these large pyramids and had been structured with that energy field began to be placed around Moscow and the Moscow region. And beginning in 1999, about 40 such rings were laid. In all cases, the number of reported cases of cancer, infectious diseases, etc., decreased dramatically in the following years. So more classic examples. Here's some more from a public health standpoint, showing that the pyramid field can influence public health over a wide distance, and could be as Dr. Golod said from the quote at the beginning of our segment here, that this could be a huge or an important way of cutting down, from a public health perspective, the need for public health expenditures. And we're going to be talking about public health expenditures for chronic disease later in this talk. Now we're going to talk about some stress-reducing effects. This is perhaps my I think is the most interesting experiment that was done in Russia. They showed that the pyramid energy drastically improved prisoner behavior. And the focus here was to determine the effect of pyramid-treated table salt on the behavior of a population of 6,000 prisoners. The methodology here: over 5 tons of table salt were stored in one of the large Russian pyramids. The salt was then distributed and used for cooking and table use by the nutrition services of prisons within the Russian federal penitentiary system, housing over 6,000 prisoners. The incidence of criminal behavior in the prisons virtually disappeared within a few months after they began using this table salt, suggesting a corresponding increase in feelings of peacefulness and goodwill among the inmates within the facility. And I want to stop, and Lisa, you might want to comment on this because you've been with me, but probably the most important thing that Lisa and I have found over the last year going to various expos is that the comments from people who sit under the pyramid, of course, people will say, oh, I feel a tingling or I feel something. But the most important quantitative or specific experience they talk about is that sense of peacefulness.
Yeah, definitely. I love this study with the prisoners, and it actually gives me some bigger ideas as well. Every time I meet with you guys, I have a whole tablet full of more ideas by the time this pyramid quest episode is over. But I actually make ormus as well. Are you familiar with ormus? Monoatomic gold ormus, out of usually salt. You make it out of Dead Sea salt, Himalayan salt, Celtic sea salt. Charging that salt in the pyramid before you make the ormus, that's my next project.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So anyway, to get back to finish up with the results, according to Dr. Golod, after 6 months of using the table salt, the employees of these institutions spoke the same basic idea, namely that the prisoners were acting so much nicer that people wondered whether they had been somehow replaced with a new group of prison population. And after 11 months following, the following statistics were calculated. The death rate among the prisoners dropped by 3.5 times. Serious crimes went to 0, and the number of rule violations decreased by a factor of 3. So this experience led Dr. Golod to study the mechanism of what had actually happened with the prisoners. Subsequent tests that we're going to talk about here in a moment showed that reduced aggressiveness in mice after drinking pyramid water resulted in what Dr. Golod called an acquired resistance to stress. And, you know, I'll talk about that from my own perspective. I know that the likelihood of me kind of flying off the handle anymore is almost completely gone. And I really do attribute it in large part to this acquired ability to focus with stress. And we're going to find out later how much of an important factor stress is in our immune system as well.
Yeah, real quick, Charlie, one thing I wanted to comment on, you know, our children are some of the biggest prisoners in our society now. You know, they get diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, you know, just because they're being children and they're bringing their light into our world, and that's what we need to help heal it. And they're being, you know, submitted with all these medicines. How about using the salt, you know, charging some salt in the pyramid and giving that to your children, or, you know, and instead of the medications, and see how that affects them instead, you know, way less side effects.
Absolutely. All of these things could be studied and will be studied once we, you know, have the foundation up and running.
You know, Charlie, this study also reminds me of the Hawaiian, I forget his name, but the guy who brought Ho'oponopono to everyone's attention.
Yes.
Dr. Hewlin. Dr. Hewlin.
Thank you. Yes, because, I mean, he started with, you know, a whole prison full of, you know, inmates, and pretty soon they got rid of the whole prison because everyone was nice. And
oh, I didn't know it was a prison. I thought it was a psych ward, and that he never once looked at any patients. The registered nurse would bring in the actual, you know, diagnosis of the person and would say what was going on with the person, but he recognized that he magnetized that person, so it was something internally within him that needed to be healed. And if he healed himself by doing, I'm sorry, I love you, please forgive me, thank you, Ho'oponopono, that it would eventually heal that patient. And eventually there was no longer any psych ward or prison, as you were saying, Bill.
That's right. Worked himself out of a job.
He did.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So anyway, to finish up on this is the last one that in this segment of research, but referenced earlier, they did studies to look at the stress-related behavior in laboratory mice. And so studies were conducted on the effect of a group of mice of placing a 1 gram piece of crystalline gypsum. Again, this is nothing more than putting quartz or or a rock with crystalline content inside the pyramid and charging it up. But they took crystalline gypsum in this case, previously placed in the Russian pyramid, and they placed it next to the cell of mice. The control group was not so exposed, and for 5 days, the number of fights in the cell was counted using a microphone system. And the number of fights in the experimental group was on average 3.5 times lower than that in the control group. At the same time, and we're going to get to this in the next part of how does this all happen research, the thymus cellularity indices were optimized. So just remember that, because we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. But basically what that's telling you is that the thymus, the cellularity or the size of the thymus seems to be impacted tremendously by stress. So what this pyramid seems to be able to do is to actually regenerate thymus cells and thereby improve or reactivate its effectiveness in the immune system. So that's what we're going to start to talk about now. How do we explain these results? To do that, I want to just give a very basic introduction to the immune system itself. This is nothing more than a dictionary definition of the immune system. It's the bodily system that protects the body from foreign substances, cells, and tissues by producing the immune response. And that includes especially the thymus. We've talked about it. We're going to talk about it some more. Spleen, lymph nodes, and special deposits of lymphoid tissue, macrophages, lymphocytes we're going to talk about, B and T cells, and antibodies. So all of these are important parts of the immune system. We're going to find in the research that there are 2 areas in particular that the Russian research has pinpointed where the pyramid has an amazingly important function in improving immune function, namely that of the thymus and the lymphocytes. So we're going to be focusing on those 2 to see what role they actually play. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the immune system, there's 2 types of immunity. There's what's called an innate immunity, which is a group of non-specific defense mechanisms that we're born with that come into play immediately or within hours of an antigen or something that needs to be taken out of the body's appearance in the body. So there's also, however, what's called adaptive immunity. And adaptive immunity is important because as we grow, if we have a healthy immune function, we have healthy lymphocytes, growth, proliferation, and longevity, and we have a functioning thymus, we will have an incredible immune system that should take care of virtually any and every pathogen that might come into to the body. But without a healthy immune system, this adaptive immunity, as we're going to find out, is going to be compromised over time, and therefore it's going to have a major negative impact on our ability to fight off disease. And here's something that I think is important. Lisa and I were talking about this before we started the show, but I don't want to dwell on it. But antibiotics, which I know are used literally with hardly any regard to whether the underlying disease that they're being used for is viral or bacterial, but antibiotics may actually reduce the ability of immune cells to kill bacteria in the body. And I'll let Lisa talk about this for a minute, but essentially, profligate use of this both in humans and in livestock is what's causing a lot of the problems with our inability to fight off disease.
Yeah, so what they're finding is that our immune system is the good beneficial bacteria in our gut. And when we consume the antibiotics, it's not only killing the bad bacteria, it's killing the good bacteria, which is our immune system. So it takes you a lot longer to overcome these sicknesses. And what we're finding, because in the West, 90% of the antibiotics in the West are given to our commercial farming industry for their animals because they're so sick. They are filled with, they feed them corn, for instance, the cows, which produces acidosis and inflammation of the body. So now they have to give them the antibiotics to reduce the inflammation. So when you're consuming the meat, the milk, the butter from those animals, you're consuming those antibiotics. So a lot of people will find now that if they do get sick, they go and get an antibiotic, it doesn't work. They have to go back again and get another, sometimes a third and a fourth antibiotic before anything works because their system's already overrun with antibiotics. They're used to those antibiotics. So, using simple things like colloidal silver, which is a natural antibiotic instead of the regular antibiotics, would be way more beneficial.
Sure. Or even, as we're going to find out, using the pyramid as well. So.
Yeah.
But and I'm saying that there's plenty of ways to improve and enhance your immune system. So there's nothing wrong with colloidal silver. It's wonderful. There's plenty of other things to do. This is just part of a total system of trying to improve your immune function. So
and you need to focus on things that aren't going to kill the immune system. That's what you need to overcome the illnesses is the immune system.
That's right. So anyway, I want to start with a brief discussion of lymphocytes. As we mentioned before, lymphocytes, we'll start here. Lymphocytes are a type of white blood cell that is of fundamental importance in the immune system because lymphocytes are the cells that determine the specificity of the immune response to infectious microorganisms and other foreign substances. In human adults, lymphocytes can make up roughly 20 to 40% of the total number of white blood cells. They are found in the circulation and are also concentrated in central lymphoid organs and tissues such as the spleen, tonsils, and lymph nodes, where the initial immune response is likely to occur. There are two types, primary types of lymphocytes, and they are the B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. You'll see why all this is important in a few minutes, so just kind of try to bear with us as we get through this. Both originate from stem cells in the bone marrow and initially are similar in appearance. However, some lymphocytes migrate to the thymus. As we mentioned earlier, we're going to talk more about that, where they mature into T cells or thymus cells. Others remain in the bone marrow and develop into B cells or bone marrow cells. Most lymphocytes are short-lived. This is going to become important, this section, with an average lifespan of a week to a few months. But a few live for years, providing a pool of long-lived T and B cells. And these long-lived cells account for the immunological memory, a more rapid, vigorous response to a second encounter with the same antigen. So, to go back, if we can prolong the life and the proliferation of these cells throughout our body, not only are we going to have a more robust response, but we're going to have these cells that have this immunological memory which means that they already know exactly what they have to do to deal with a viral function or a bacterial infection or whatever it is. So there truly is an ability of the human body to learn from its previous encounters in developing immune response into adulthood. So continuing on, through receptor molecules on their surfaces, lymphocytes are able to bind to antigens or foreign substances and help remove them from the body. Each lymphocyte bears receptors that bind to a specific region. The ability to respond to any antigen comes from, this is important, the enormous variety of lymphocyte populations that the body contains, each of them with a receptor capable of recognizing a unique antigen. Now, in the thymus, the T cells multiply and differentiate into helper, regulatory, or cytotoxic T cells, or become memory T cells. They are then seeded to tissues and circulated in the blood or the lymphatic system. Once stimulated by the appropriate antigen, helper T cells secrete chemical messengers called cytokines, which stimulate the differentiation of B cells into plasma, thereby promoting antibody production. Regulatory T cells act to control immune reactions, hence their name. Cytotoxic T cells bind to and kill infected cells and cancer cells. That's a lot of information, but as you can see, you absolutely need a well-functioning bone marrow production as well as well-functioning T cells in order for this symphony of immunity to function properly. And we'll skip over this for now. The method of action section is going to begin now. The first thing we're going to talk about now is that very thing that we just mentioned, lymphocyte proliferation and longevity, which we found is fundamental to immune health. So the goal of this experiment was to determine whether exposure to the Russian geometry pyramid fields had impacts on lymphocytes. And what they did was a study of the effects of the pyramid water on human lymphocyte or lymphoblast cells. In the experimental group, water was placed inside the pyramid, was used to prepare a solution of nutrient growth medium, whereas in the control group, water that had not been exposed to the pyramid was used. Cell viability, which means both number and whether they're living or not, was determined by staining cells with various types of dyes. Now the results, and these are very profound, by day 10, once they had put the cells into the medium, by day 10, a noticeable increase in the number of lymphocyte cells and the percentage of cell viability in the treated exposure group compared to the control group was observed. On day 11, the values were respectively, for the control group, there were 1.2 million cells per milliliter that were found, and 52% of those were viable, which means still alive. So what that means, again, in the control group, you had 622,000 cells that were still alive, but in the group with the pyramid water, the number of total cells had increased from 1.2 to 1.4 million, and the percentage that were viable had gone from 52 to 88%, so that the total number of viable cells at the end of day 11 was 1,232,000 per milliliter versus 622,000, twice as many. And remember, these are the cells that are crucial to our immune function. On day 21, these values were 0.05 million, which is 50,000 per milliliter, and 2% viable. So that's a total of only 1,000 cells that remain viable per milliliter in the control group versus 300,000 total cells with 49% viability, or 147,000 viable cells that were still alive after day 21. Now, not only is 147,000 hugely larger than 1,000 cells, but as you remember, we talked about the importance of the longer-lived lymphocyte cells were the ones that could retain that memory of infection. So without those long-lived cells floating around in our body, which clearly is not occurring to anywhere near the degree without the pyramid water, that's the reason why pyramid, one of the reasons why the pyramid is having such a great improvement in immune function in our studies. Okay, next segment has to do with the thymus. Now, I think what I'll do is discuss the thymus role again in immune health, and we'll come back to the results. A gland called your thymus gland is located in your chest, just above your heart. Despite its small size, this two-lobed gland plays an important role in immune health. It's within the tissue of the thymus gland that immune cells called T cells mature and become capable of fighting off bacteria, viruses, parasites, and other foreign invaders. The birth of future immune cells begins in your bone marrow, where specialized but immature cells called lymphocytes are produced. These are future T cells that will eventually take on the task of protecting against foreign invaders like viruses, but first the cells have to mature. To become full-fledged T cells capable of attacking interlopers, they must first travel to the thymus where they mature and become more specialized. Once mature, they graduate to become official members of the T cell community. T cells come in various types, including the CD4 and CD8 cells. One, as we discussed before, works as a surveillance, that's the CD4, whereas the CD8 cells, once they are triggered by the CD4 cells, go into attack mode. To go to the second half of this page, this is important again. The thymus gland is most active during childhood. Although the thymus gland plays an active role in immune health, the once hardy gland begins to shrink in size around puberty. The remaining thymic tissue is gradually converted to inactive fat and connective tissue. By late middle age, the thymus gland is only a shadow of its former self. As the dying gland changes in size and its glandular tissue is replaced by fat, the amount of thymic proteins it produces declines as well. Remember how the thymic protein helps immune cells change into mature T cells? There's little thymic protein left to do that, and that has severe implications for immune health. Research clearly shows the ability to fight off infections diminishes with age. This phenomenon is called immunosenescence. Studies suggest the loss of thymus gland activity and the production of thymic proteins is a contributor to the immunosenescence of aging. Don't forget, a healthy immune system helps protect against another type of age-related disease, namely cancer. Healthy T cells are able to recognize abnormal cells that have undergone malignant change and destroy them, and thereby protect us against infection and cancer. So to go back now to the results, you've seen why the thymus is so important. In the methodology, the experimental group of mice received a salt to water solution where the salt had been stored inside the pyramid before administering it to the mice. The control group also received a 10% salt to water solution, but the salt had not been exposed to the pyramid. The solutions were administered orally at the rate of 5 drops per day. And the results in the experiment, the number of thymus cells was calculated in the mice. It has been previously determined that the number of thymus cells and by extension, thyroid and immune function greatly decreases with age and stress. And in the control group, the number of thymus cells in the mice varied, and this the 10 to the 7th power really isn't relevant here, but look at the distinction of 0.1 to 28 is the amount of variation in the number of thymus cells in the untreated mice. Now we're going to look at the variation in the number of thymus cells in the treated mice, and it varied much less dramatically and varied only from 5 to 7.8 rather than from 0.1 to 28. So it can be assumed that the effect of the 10% salt water solution from the pyramid had a pronounced anti-stress effect, which is what we all see when we talk to people, and I've experienced in my own life. And that optimizes the size of the thymus, which is one of the indicators characterizing the immunological status of the organism. That's a mouthful, but what that's telling you is that apparently the thymus gland can begin to regenerate and regrow even if it has declined in size by exposure directly or indirectly to the pyramid. And that has a huge impact on the ability of the immune function inside the human body to perform at its peak. So that's where we're going to stop the research on immune function. If there's any questions or comments at this point before we move on, maybe it's a good time to let others chime in.
Is there going to be a test after this, Charlie?
No. That's a lot of information to throw down to people I know in a hurry, but I wanted to.
It was great information. That was really good.
And you know, again, all that we're showing is that this is real science. These folks have done this research. The research clearly proves that there are dramatic changes in the human body's immune system, and that's the reason why we can find these dramatic public health and individual health benefits from the use of the pyramid. So
most of the studies, real quick, most of the studies are with water, pyramid charged water. And you know, water they found is a crystalline structure and it retains memory. So all you're doing is reprogramming that water and ingesting it. Or if you sit in the pyramid yourself, our body's made up of 70% water. So you're also doing the same thing when you're sitting in the pyramid yourself. You're recharging that water, you're reprogramming that water inside of you.
I figure one of the reasons they used water or salt as opposed to an actual pyramid is they were dealing largely with mice or young children. And so it was probably just easier to use. But, you know, we obviously, when the time comes to do this research, we'll want to check it and see if it matters which way that energy is actually brought to bear on the subject. So anyway, we'll continue on with the other health-related research.
Charlie, one other thought. I mean,
yes,
this reminds me of, well, what Linda was saying last week about how she thinks structured water is very important.
Absolutely.
In relation to the pyramid.
Absolutely right. I am a big believer in structured water and drink it all the time. So.
Maybe we need to do some testing on that.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a good idea. So anyway, here's the balance of the health-related research that comes from Russia. This is actually coming from pyramids.ru.com and my own research, which I'll show you in a minute. But in essence, what they did here, there's a professor in Russia called Konstantin Korotkov, who's developed probably the best Kirlian type photography on the planet, and he calls it gas discharge visualization, or GDV. And he's developed a camera to do that. On the website, they have a photo. They don't have before and after, otherwise I would have put it on here to show you, but I have some from my own research. But essentially, what the analysis, if you go to the second paragraph, of the general physical condition and energy before and after the interaction with the in-house pyramid demonstrates the powerful impact of a favorable energy. After 6 hours being in a pyramid's energy field, energy cocoon that surrounds the body increased in size, and resizing of the energy centers or chakras led to a rising of the aura's density. Its color became more golden. So, there's your source right there for that information on their website. But we've also done this. We don't have a GDV camera near where I live, so I've used a different kind of aura system called WinAura to do my photography, and I'll show you that in a minute. And unlike the Russian research, when I did my before and after, I only sat in the pyramid for 30 minutes rather than 6 hours. So keep that in mind. And the other thing that I want to tell people is that I did this particular session over a year ago. We did not put any enhancements into the pyramids at that time. So there was no quartz sand in the base of the pyramid, nor was there a custom capstone. So I can't wait to go back and try this with Lisa's capstones, because I know that we're going to get even more dramatic results. But what I thought I'd show you here is, this is a picture of my aura before and after sitting in the pyramid. I don't know if any of you out there are, can read these, but I do know that to my left, when I was sitting there, or on the right of the photograph, is incoming energy, and the stuff on the left side or of the photo, or my right side as I was sitting down, is the energy field that's coming out. And I do know that the higher, the changes in color represent a change in the frequency of the vibration that's coming in and is going out from the energy field. So there's clearly a major change in my aura from sitting in the pyramid for 30 minutes. And then secondly, I also did this, as part of the results, you get this chakra bar graph, which 100 is, in their definitions, is 100% functioning. So these are the 7 chakras: root chakras, sex chakras, anyway, that's I guess the abdomen, heart, throat, third eye, and crown.
So it's the root, sacral, solar
plexus, solar plexus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would love, like I say, I can't wait to try this with Lisa's capstone, because we know how much more energetic it is. So this is just an unenhanced pyramid. But one thing that you can see, there was a dramatic change in the colors of the energy fields, and they became, they became more high frequency and more in correspondence with what the energy field color should be of those particular chakras. And more importantly, you can see that it enhanced the energy fields at virtually every point of the 7 chakras. So I believe my root, sex, solar plexus chakras all went up. My heart chakra, although it was pretty high before, it went up to 100%. My throat chakra went up. My third eye is functioning at 100%. My crown chakra went up quite a bit. So there's clearly, a distinguishing, a clear change in the energy field. So, and again, this was only 30 minutes, not 6 hours like the Russians had done it. So that's another area of research.
We have some people that are talking through chat with us. Reality lives. The earth is flat and stationary like the Bible says. Protect yourself from nano weapons being sprayed on us by sprinkling borax in your daily water. Also apple cider vinegar every day. Lady Dice says good morning. Mahesh says hi. Ambu said something here, and I thought this was interesting of what you're saying there, that limited impact on your lower chakras as the chart appears. So it's mainly having more of an effect on your upper chakra, starting with the heart chakra. So that was
Seems to be. Seems to be. Yeah. 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 So, obviously more research to come there as well, but there's clearly an impact. Now, here's some other research. The pyramid water improves the coagulatory system, and that is basically a function of the number of platelets that show up in your blood. And essentially, what they did was possible changes in the blood coagulation system of rabbits was explored when replacing normal drinking water with water exposed to the pyramid. Studies were conducted for 14 days, and blood from rabbits was taken before the start of consumption of pyramid water, as well as 7 and 14 days after the start of the experiment. So again, what we've got is our base case is set at 100 here, and that's 100% is without the pyramid water. So the results are the number of platelets was taken as 100% without the pyramid water. On the 7th day after the start of the experiment, the number of blood platelets had increased to 129% of the base case, and on the 14th day had increased to 167%, indicating pyramid exposure as a natural method for alleviating thrombocytopenia or low blood platelet count. Here's some more information that I think is relevant. Bill, I don't know if you've experienced this in your hikes, but at least in animals, athletic endurance was increased by 200%. Rabbits and white mice were exposed to the pyramid and then compared in various exercises to control groups for endurance. And animals exposed to the pyramid gained 200% more endurance than control group animals, and their blood contained higher concentrations of leukocytes, again, the white blood cells necessary for immune function. And one other, Russian geometry pyramids aid in drug and alcohol addiction recovery. This is one that I think could have just enormous impacts on our society. In the zone of the pyramid or in the zone of objects exhibited in the pyramid, the effectiveness of any effects of a psychotropic nature decreases, number one. So, for those of you who, are into getting high, if you're inside the pyramid, you're not going to be able to do that quite as easily. I think the same thing holds for alcohol as well. So that's one thing that happens, but there's also very encouraging data where standard solutions of pyramid water were given intravenously and externally for alcohol and drug addiction, even in very advanced forms, and they had very, very positive results. So obviously—
No, Charlie, they did experiments with putting poisons, remember, inside of the pyramid, and it neutralized the toxicity of those poisons. So that would be the same with drugs and alcohol. But I'm wondering about natural herbs, drugs like marijuana. It's natural, it's nature. I wonder if, because they've also done studies that it increases the potency of beneficial things when you put it inside of the pyramid as well. And, drug and alcohol addiction is mainly just a lack of connection. So same with like children with ADHD, if the pyramid seemed to bring people more centered.
That's right.
To discover the real self.
I do remember David Wilcox saying that if you smoke pot, that you wouldn't be as high inside the pyramid. I do remember that, but this is just, this is just a whole new world of exploration here in drug and alcohol addiction.
But that's what I mean. Maybe it's changing the high. You're still high, but it's bringing more of a center to
That
yourself
could
instead
be.
of a ditziness or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, much more to come there, but you know, I do know that when I was living in Pittsburgh, there was a young man who was in a halfway house, and he started using the pyramid for a while, and he seemed to have some pretty significant results in being able to you know withdraw from his drug and alcohol addictions. So something obviously for further study. Now, the last thing I want to
Yeah.
talk about today is pyramids and EMFs. Now, this is not research that was done in Russia. This is research that um, we've done here. And so this is all based on our own research. I'm going to present a thesis here. And there's obviously a lot more that we're going to need to do. But our own research has demonstrated that harmful EMF frequencies can be remediated or harmonized through exposure to Russian geometry pyramids. And we did a piece on this several months ago where we showed that using the Lecker antenna, which is a scientific instrument used for qualitative detection of energy fields, we were able to demonstrate that the frequency of electromagnetic pollution, as defined by the Lecker antenna, was not detected within the pyramid and within a certain area outside of the pyramid, which was a function of the enhancements that we placed into the pyramid, such as the capstone. The volume of area benefiting was found to be a function of size of the pyramid as well as the types of energy enhancements. So with that said, I want to talk briefly about chronic disease and this whole area of EMFs, because I think this could be as important a research as all of the other stuff that we've seen from the Russian research earlier in this session. So a chronic disease, just to give it a definition, is a disease that persists for a long time. Chronic disease is one lasting 3 months or more by the definition of the U.S. National Center for Health Statistics. Chronic diseases generally, and this is important, cannot be prevented by vaccines or cured by medication, nor do they just disappear. 88% of Americans over 65 years of age have at least one chronic disease or chronic health condition. Health damaging behaviors, particularly tobacco use, lack of activity, poor eating habits, are major contributors to the leading chronic diseases. So with that as backdrop, I want to tell you some facts that I have put together over the last several years, which are very, very significant to this topic. There are approximately 7,000 scientific articles correlating chronic disease with EMF radiation. I have personally, and I guess if people want this, I can put this up at some point. I have developed a list of over 500 chronic diseases that are caused by or exacerbated by EMF exposure, all backed by scientific research. Here's a key factor: 84% of all healthcare expenditures and 99% of all Medicare expenditures relate to chronic disease. Up until the mid-1970s, the medical units of the US military were among the most prolific organizations disseminating information regarding the link between chronic diseases and EMFs. However, after 1976, this information was no longer available under Freedom of Information Act requests due to quote unquote national security concerns. Some researchers are, and we have not discussed this, but Bill, maybe this is a good time to talk about some of this, are indicating that there may be a 5G link with the coronavirus. So you might want to talk about that for a minute.
Well, I mean, it's not proven by any means, but I just I've been reading that there's some link to 5G or radiation sickness, and we're now calling it coronavirus. So
Right. Well, there are some theories. This came up when I was on Richard Hoagland's show a couple of weeks ago. Some of the people who were on there were promoting the idea that, Wuhan province was the first province to experience 5G in China, and that, in fact, this virus may have been activated by potentially some specific frequency. So there's no way to prove this at this point, but there could be a link between 5G and the coronavirus. Now, separately,
Well, I also liked what Bill was saying before the show as well, when he was talking about if it was a natural virus. Bill, you were talking about the borders of China, would also be affected, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
well, it's a very interesting observation that no one in Russia has gotten the coronavirus, and yet its border with China is the largest of its borders with any other nation. So if it was a naturally occurring disease or virus, these things would propagate naturally across all borders.
Right. And with Wuhan, did I say that right? Being one of the first cities to really get 5G going and in a massive amount, that could very well be.
Just like I said, it's just an observation.
yeah, and that's all we can do at this point. But that's that becomes important, an important factor, not just with coronavirus, but with 5G in general as we move forward. But one of the things I wanted to point out for those of you who are interested in EMFs, a doctor that I admire quite a bit, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, has done a lot of research on EMFs in chronic disease, and he's found that the only consistently effective treatment for chronic diseases such as autism and Lyme disease and other diseases is the elimination and or remediation of EMFs. So that's important in the context of the information that I just told you. We are finding that at least this frequency that we are able to define of electromagnetic pollution seems to be remediated by the pyramid. So additional research is necessary to explore the impact of the pyramid's harmonizing capabilities on chronic disease prevention. And we want to study that more once we get the Pyramid Science Foundation up and running. But one thing I will also say is that the Russians are one of the world leaders in reducing EMF fields to their population. And I will say that their life expectancy is going up while that in the US is going down. So, these are all just facts that you need to have sink in about the potential importance of EMFs. Now here quickly
we're swimming in a soup of electrical magnetic frequencies
That's
every
right.
day. And once the 5G comes out, we're going to be drowning in it. So everybody's going to need to find ways to protect themselves from it.
That's right. So to the extent that we go back again to that thesis of Dr. Golod, that anything within the field of influence of the pyramid, the energy fields are harmonized, is something that we really need to figure out how to study. But certainly one way to do that indirectly, given Dr. Klinghardt's research on EMFs and chronic disease, to the extent that we can determine that chronic diseases can be reduced or eliminated by the presence of pyramids, is certainly going to lend credence to this idea. So just to finish up here, I'm going to show you this chart on healthcare expenditures. And remember, we saw chronic diseases are not, for all intents and purposes, able to be solved by any traditional medicine, drug, pharmaceutical, or medical procedure. So all of these expenditures, 99% of our expenditures for Medicare, 84% in total, are expenditures that theoretically could be lessened or eliminated by eliminating either exposure to EMFs or remediating those energy fields and frequencies through the use of a pyramid, colloidal silver, or any other number of techniques available. There's a new book out by Dr. Mercola. For those of you who don't know him, he has the #1 alternative healthcare site on the internet. He just published this book. We got a copy of it. Carol, my significant other, did last week, and I've skimmed through it. I didn't have time to read it for this session, but it's got tons of great information, up-to-date information about 5G and how to protect yourself.
All right, really quickly here we have Mbu talking a little bit again about some of the stuff that you're mentioning. Wuhan level 4 lab located 20 miles away. Gates ordered a simulation. Bill Gates ordered a simulation a few months before event 201. Sherry Edwards has decoded the frequency signature and confirms it's engineered. Wuhan was center stage for their 5G rollout. Trump is aware of 5G dangers. They're recalibrating. He says, thanks God for the courageous military and bringing back nutrition into their medical 8-year curriculum.
Cool. So anyway, we're about ready to close up. Or just in summary, the Russian pyramid research has demonstrated the ability of the pyramid to dramatically improve immune function, both through enhancement of lymphocyte proliferation and longevity, as well as by regenerating or optimizing the size of the thymus gland. And these findings have enormous implications for both personal and public health. Newer research that we've done into Russian pyramid EMF remediation opens up a whole bunch of new areas of research and solutions for all sorts of chronic disease. And the Science Foundation that we're putting together will be exploring these areas and many more in the near future. So with that, I am done with the formal presentation. Just open this up now for comment. Michael, do you have any comments? I see you're on board today.
Yay, Michael, we were wondering where you were.
Are you? Let me see if I can. I don't know if Michael's got his mute on. Here, unmute. Maybe Michael was well, let's see.
Okay, so Joe Black, just while we're looking for Michael, Joe Black, not sure if this has been discussed yet, but do you know if experiments exist where experiencers of spirituality enhancing drugs, i.e. psychedelics, report enhanced or suppressed experience when exposed?
That's what I was wondering about the marijuana, and I think it would be beneficial. I mean, it increases the potency of beneficial products, and you're connecting to deeper versions of yourself, different entities. I really think it's something we need to experience. We need to experiment with the foundation as well.
Absolutely. So there seems to be, like I say, I was looking at it more from, and the research from the addiction recovery standpoint. That's the way they were looking at it in Russia. So, but yeah, from a personal.
Really, addiction recovery is a lack of connection. And really these medicinal, like the mushrooms, LSD, things like that, they connect you more spiritually. They're going to connect you, and it's going to open up a whole new world for you and a whole new perspective of the world that you're living in now, and help people overcome that addiction and recovery. Sure.
Well, I mean, I can kind of say this after I was able, and I was just starting to work with the pyramids when I started meditating again, consistently, but connecting with the higher self does at least seem to eradicate the need for escape. Once you've kind of
Right.
reconnected with your higher self, there just doesn't seem to be the desire or need
Right.
to do that.
And I'm not
Could
an
you imagine
advocate for,
an ayahuasca? Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I am just not an advocate for that. I think we all can reach those levels of like ayahuasca, of, you know, what THC does to people, all of that on our own without doing those things. Those things just tend to enhance it and take you somewhere quicker. And sometimes not when you're necessarily
Ready to, yeah.
ready to be there. And usually, and
Yeah.
if you look at a lot of people that do ayahuasca, and I mean, not saying anything bad, because this is a high spiritual DMT, that when they're using that type of herb or that plant, there are high spiritual, Charlie and I have talked about this, high spiritual existence that you're going to be a part of. Now, wherever you are in that moment is where you're going to get your lessons and learn about what's going on. And for some people, it's very fantastic. For others, it's very
Traumatic.
eye-opening. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
Right. And there have been a lot of studies with ayahuasca that it does help those people with strong addictions get off of those addictions. Now, I am an advocate for CBD oil that heals, but when it comes to smoking weed, I have always had to clear energy from people from smoking weed. And this has just been my experience, that it brings in negative portals, vortexes, ghosts, demons, things like that. So, I mean, and Charlie and I have talked about that before. And that's my only concern. And again, Lisa, it's always what you're saying is, what's your intention? And what is the drug really being utilized for? Is it being used as a tool, or is it being to escape the daily life? What's great about the pyramid, what I have learned is that, you know, we have these receptors in our brain, and it helps us connect and feel more connected to the universe and consciousness. And without, you know, you don't have to already be at a high conscious level. You can just start feeling these wonderful effects of the pyramid just by sitting in it. And eventually what happens is it has this effect to build your mind, like, what else can I do? What else can I read? What else can I look at? What else can I improve in my life? I've not known anyone that had your pyramid, Charlie, that has done anything and gone the reverse way. I've seen everyone benefit from your pyramid. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I have to admit the same thing. It's kind of like the old saying, you know, nothing ever to somebody who drinks too much. Nobody's ever gotten any worse by stopping drinking. You know, no one's going to get hurt by using this pyramid. They're only going to get better. So I would totally agree. So, well, we've probably taken up enough time for today. So I think we'll stop for today. I really do want to ask everyone, I think this is really important information. So let your friends know about this. For people who are afraid, have a fear of this virus, know that there are ways to improve your immunity naturally. The pyramid is only one of these, but I think it's one that particularly given the existing research, you know, from Russia shows has a tremendous impact on public health and communicable disease reduction. So as always, we thank you for.
I think you presented the material very well, Charlie. You didn't cause any type of fear mongering. It's all about protecting yourself, educating yourself on how to protect yourself.
Well, that's right. That's right. I mean, avoidance is always the best, but we can't avoid this completely in this environment. And so, you know, doing things to improve your immune health is the most important thing that any of us, I think, can do over and above the types of specific energy or frequency research that people like Sherry Lewis is doing, which is fantastic in and of itself. But these are all complementary techniques and ideas. So know that there are plenty of ways, and that's the key point here, pyramids being one, that's been scientifically proven to enhance your immune function. So as always, we all thank you for watching. Tell your friends about Stargate Pyramids and also about Pyramid Quest here on the Stargate Pyramid YouTube channel every Monday at noontime. We thank you for watching, and you have a great day.